Another landmark Supreme Court case at the end of the 1970s was Roe v. Wade. This Supreme Court decision ruled that first trimester abortions were not illegal. All state laws prohibiting such abortions were made unconstitutional. The decision was based on a woman's right to privacy, and it led to a lot of criticism from Roman Catholics and right-to-life groups. Gerald Ford became president when Nixon resigned. He had become vice president when Nixon's Vice President Agnew resigned because of financial irregularities and tax evasion. Ford pardoned Nixon for any crimes that he may or may not have committed, even though the former president hadn't been charged with anything. His rise to power represented the first use of the 25th Amendment, which provided for action in case of a vice presidential vacancy. He was okay. He didn't do a whole heck of a lot. Carter comes next. Carter was kind of controversial. He was a born-again Christian and a peanut farmer who actually, if you ask a lot of farmers today, apparently they're not big fans of Carter. He wanted to make a responsible government. He reduced unemployment and eased the energy crisis and negotiated the Camp David Accords, which was a peace agreement in the Middle East between Israel and Egypt over disputed lands. His presidency probably is most best known, however, for the Iran hostage situation, as well as inflation. The Iran hostage situation was that a group of Americans were held hostage for, it was like 444 days, I want to say, during the end of his presidency, and they were released the night that Reagan was sworn in. During his tenure in office and since his loss to Reagan, however, Carter has become very instrumental in terms of human rights around the world and has gone on to win a Nobel Peace Prize. In Baker v. Regents of the University of California, the Supreme Court upheld the university's use of race in its admissions decisions. In that Baker had it was kind of an affirmative action type of case where they had specific quotas they were trying to fill to make sure that minorities were represented at the university. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, you can't use racial quotas, but if you're trying to make sure that you're diverse, go ahead and look at race. There's the Iran hostage situation spelled out. America had supported the Shah of Iran, who had lost power after a coup or an overthrow by a guy by the name of Ayatollah Khomeini. The supporters of Khomeini were anti-American because of the support of the Shah. Carter allowed the Shah to receive medical attention in the U.S., which upset the Iranians. So the Iranian revolutionaries stormed the American embassy and took these hostages. Carter, in response, froze the Iranian assets in the U.S. and sent ships within striking distance, but the peace accord was finally signed on the day of Reagan's inauguration. 3 Mile Island is the worst nuclear disaster in America. A nuclear power plant located south of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, overheated, and part of its uranium core melted. It was caused by a variety of errors, including human, and some radioactive waters and gases were released, but it wasn't like as bad as Chernobyl by any level. It led to a slowdown in the construction of other reactors, and it also led to changes in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Americans also became more aware of environmental concerns at that time. Reagan was the 40th president. He defeated Carter easily. He increased military spending, increased the Strategic Defense Initiative, which was called the Star Wars program, where they were basically trying to create, almost if you want to think of them as like military bases in outer space to protect us from interspace missiles, like that might be fired from other countries. He got a huge tax cut. He tried to increase investments and improve the job market. That's all part of Reaganomics. After first increasing the number of nuclear weapons, he is going to work with the guy who is in charge of Russia now, at that time, I mean. His name is Gorbachev. And he got Gorbachev to tear down the Berlin Wall and those types of things. And he actually wins re-election over Walter Mondale and, very important, a female, Geraldine Ferrara. So Gorbachev was in charge of Russia during the 80s, and he's going to work to really bring the Cold War to an end. It's called détente when it thawed. He's going to remove troops from Afghanistan. He's going to liberalize some of the things that had been going on in the Soviet government, including he did what's called glasnost, which is like the opening up of government. And then once you opened it, perestroika is the restructuring of the government of Russia. And Reagan's going to say, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, about the Berlin Wall, and he does. So he was a key player in the end of the Cold War, as well as the fall of communism in Russia. The Iran-Contra affair was a scandal involving the CIA, the NSC, and the Reagan administration. Reagan's going to have a variety of scandals, but none of them involve him directly. They call him the Teflon president because no scandal could stick to him. This one was where we sold weapons to Iranians who were friendly to America in order to encourage them to free the hostages. And then the profit of the sale of weapons went to go fund Nicaraguan revolutionaries who were fighting against a government, the Sandinista government, that we didn't like. Congress had approved neither the sale nor the funding, and it's going to result in several people wind up going to jail. For many of the hearings echoed the Watergate scandal because it looked like the government was doing some secret shady stuff, and so we became increasingly skeptical of our government. Black Monday was the name given to the stock market crash that happened in the 1980s. The Dow Jones dropped the largest it had ever dropped, I should say single day drop, since 1914. So it was bigger than Black Tuesday and Thursday of the Great Depression. This was caused because of trade deficits, computerized trading, and American criticism of West Germany's economic policies. The crash later affected the insurance industry and was a huge cause of the savings and loan crisis, which was a lax in regulation of the savings and loan industry, and therefore led to high levels of debt and unemployment. The economic environment following Black Monday worsened the savings and loan financial disaster. As the federal government guaranteed deposits up to $100,000, it was forced to pay a $166 billion rescue appropriation, and it's representative of the effects of poor governmental regulation. Reagan's vice president was Bush, Daddy Bush. So Daddy Bush becomes the 41st president. He was former head of the CIA. He was also a UN ambassador. He is going to send troops to overthrow a dude that we hated in Panama by the name of Manuel Noriega. And he's also going to lead the U.S. to success in the Gulf War, which was Iraq invading Kuwait's oil fields, and we didn't like that, so we were like, get out of here. START was the name for the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. It's another treaty to try to limit the use of weapons. This one is Gorbachev and Bush, so it's kind of like SALT Treaty, but 10 years later. It's going to cut the nuclear weapons arsenal of both nations by 30%, and it is considered one of the biggest indications of an easing of tensions between us and the Soviets. Unfortunately, that's what allowed a lot of other countries to buy these weapons that were being sold off. I just explained the Persian Gulf War, but in case you missed it, Saddam Hussein had taken over as a dictator in Iraq, invaded Kuwait, where our oil fields that we had been using were threatened. After Iraq failed to meet the deadline for peaceful withdrawal, the U.S. launched Operation Desert Storm on January 18, 1991, led by German Norman Schwarzkopf. Airstrikes were followed by a grand war. Multinational forces defeated the Iraqi troops and liberated Kuwait. Though under heavy embargo, Saddam was left in power, which would lead to a second war with Iraq during not Daddy Bush's presidency. So some people think that's part of why we went to war. So Soviet Union collapses. Yay! Effects of this is new opportunities for trade. Former Soviet territories had challenges in terms of they just got their independence for the first time in 60, 70, some cases 100 years. What are they going to do? So there's a bit of a political instability. And then breakup of nations created a bunch of new foreign policy challenges. After Daddy Bush, who only served one term, Bill Clinton comes to presidency. He's the 42nd president, former law professor, Attorney General of Arkansas, and Governor of Arkansas. He was successful in achieving gun control measures, a strong economy, and time off for family leave, so like maternity leave, and also welfare reform. So he did a lot of stuff domestically. Internationally, he joined NAFTA, which was the North American Free Trade Agreement. And so this is going to make easier trade between us, Canada, and Mexico. But he was impeached by the House of Representatives after he had a special girlfriend. The Branch Davidian incident was that there was this dude named David Koresh who he and his followers lived in Waco, Texas, and they were basically a cult. And there was rumors of like child abuse, and they weren't paying taxes on the land they had, and they might have been selling arms. So there were a lot of different reasons for this. But the FBI, the ATF, and the Branch Davidians basically wind up in this giant standoff, which resulted in a giant shootout where 4 federal agents and 5 Branch Davidians were killed. And then it ultimately ended with the burning down of the compound and the death of Koresh and the rest of his followers. The Oklahoma City bombing is one of the worst instances of domestic terrorism. A guy by the name of Timothy McVeigh destroyed the Oklahoma City, Oklahoma City Federal Building with a fertilizer bomb. 168 people were killed in the destruction, and McVeigh said it was in protest to the Branch Davidian. He was executed by lethal injection in 2001. G.W. Bush was the 43rd president, former Texas governor. He won after a dispute between who actually won with Gore, where it looked like Gore might have won and then looked like Bush might have won, and it was hard to tell because of the Florida votes. Wound up going to Supreme Court case, and Gore ultimately was like, heck with this, just give him the presidency. As President, Bush passed a lot of things in an effort to improve education, like No Child Left Behind. But after 9/11, he focused his efforts on Afghanistan and Iraq. 9/11, this was the 4 hijacked planes that were led by terrorists into various World Trade Centers, the Pentagon, and then the field in Pennsylvania, resulting in the death of nearly 3,000 Americans. And as a result, it's going to cause our war on terror. Which are going to be fought primarily in Iraq and Afghanistan. We said that the objectives included getting rid of Al-Qaeda, which was the terrorist cell, as well as any other terrorists we could find, and also finding weapons of mass destruction. Hurricane Katrina was a large hurricane that caused major destruction and loss of life along the Gulf Coast, particularly because the levee system of New Orleans failed, and so the water flooded in, and 1,500 people died. But because of where the levees were and what they were deteriorating and no one was listening to them, it disproportionately affected people in poorer areas. And so there were issues of race, poverty, and political power that were debated. The federal government was very slow to respond. FEMA, the Federal Emergency Response Administration, was really slow to mobilize and get down there. And so there were a lot of investigations of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers who had designed and built it, and it just kind of became this whole scandal and debate, and a lot of people were angry about it. Barack Obama became the 44th president. He is a Democrat. He is the first African American to be elected president. If you think of where we've come in these 500 cards, his getting elected, whether or not you like his presidency, is historic. He signed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act in February of 2009, and obviously the lasting effects of his presidency will not be known. Probably the same with GW, I think, in fairness. It takes some time out of office for us to really understand everything that a president contributes. And so you see this evolution of the major political parties. The Kansas-Nebraska Act is probably the most pivotal. Today's standards, you have Obama, who is a Democrat. In the old days, he probably would have been a Republican like Lincoln was. So the parties themselves have shifted, as has America. The land, the people, a lot has changed, but a lot of our core values have stayed the same and probably always will.